He chose to believe his mom over me and divorced me for cheating. I never did. I never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get it off my chest. My marriage ended because my ex-husband chose to believe his mother's lies over me. He divorced me for cheating that never happened, and now I'm left picking up the pieces of a life I didn't destroy. My name is Sarah, and I was married to David for 7 years. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and got married 2 years after graduation. Everything seemed perfect at first. David was kind, attentive, and we had plans for our future together. We wanted to buy a house, maybe start a family in a few years, and just build a life. But there was always one problem lurking in the background: his mother, Patricia. From the moment David introduced me to his family, Patricia made it clear I wasn't good enough for her son. She'd make little comments about my career choice as a graphic designer, suggesting it wasn't a real profession like David's work as a civil engineer. She'd critique everything from how I dressed to how I kept our apartment. David would just laugh it off, saying that's how she was with everyone, that she meant well. I tried to brush it aside, thinking that with time, she'd warm up to me. I was wrong. The first few years of our marriage were relatively peaceful. We saw Patricia maybe once a month, usually for Sunday dinners at her house. I could handle that. I'd smile through her passive-aggressive comments, help with the dishes, and leave feeling exhausted, but relieved it was over for another few weeks. David seemed oblivious to how his mother treated me, or maybe he just didn't want to see it. Things started to change about 3 years into our marriage. David got a significant promotion at his engineering firm, which came with a substantial salary increase. We were thrilled. We started seriously looking at houses, meeting with a financial advisor to discuss our investment options and plan for our future. We even talked to a real estate consultant about the best neighborhoods for eventual schools and property value appreciation. That's when Patricia's behavior escalated. She started calling David almost daily, sometimes multiple times a day. She'd drop by our apartment unannounced, always with some excuse about being in the neighborhood. She began suggesting that David should invest his money in properties near her house, that we should look at homes on her street so she could help with future grandchildren. The controlling behavior was ramping up, and I started to feel suffocated. I tried talking to David about it. I explained that his mother's constant presence was putting strain on our marriage, that we needed boundaries. He'd agree in the moment, promised to talk to her, but nothing ever changed. Patricia had this hold over him that I couldn't understand. He was a grown man, successful in his career, but when it came to his mother, he turned into an obedient child. The real nightmare began about 4 years ago. I had reconnected with an old friend from college named Marcus through social media. Marcus had just moved back to town after working abroad for several years, and we decided to grab coffee and catch up. It was completely innocent. Marcus is gay and happily married to his husband, something I mentioned to David before meeting him. David said he was fine with it, that he trusted me. I met Marcus for coffee one afternoon after work. We spent maybe 2 hours talking about our lives, careers, and old college memories. I came home that evening feeling happy, telling David all about how Marcus was doing, about his husband, and their plans to open a small business together. David seemed fine, asked questions, and we had a normal evening. The next day, everything changed. David came home from work looking pale and angry. He barely said hello before he asked me to sit down. My heart started racing because I knew something was wrong, but I had no idea what. He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photos. They were pictures of me and Marcus at the coffee shop, laughing, talking, and in one photo, Marcus had his hand on my arm while telling a story. The photos had been taken from outside the coffee shop through the window. Someone had been watching us, photographing us, and the angles were deliberately chosen to make our innocent meeting look intimate. My stomach dropped. "Who sent you those?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Does it matter?" David's voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Yes, it matters. David, that's Marcus. I told you I was meeting him. He's gay, he's married. We were just catching up as friends." But David wasn't listening. He kept staring at the photos, his jaw clenched. That's when he told me. His mother had sent them. Patricia had somehow known about my coffee date. I later realized David must have mentioned it to her during one of their daily calls, and she had followed me. She'd sat outside that coffee shop, taken those photos with deliberate angles and timing, and sent them to David with a message saying she was worried about me, and that David deserved to know the truth. I was stunned. The level of manipulation and invasion of privacy was staggering, but what hurt more was that David was actually considering believing her narrative over my explanation. David, she followed me. She stalked me and took photos to make something innocent look suspicious. Can't you see how crazy this is? I was practically begging him to see reason. He just shook his head. My mother wouldn't lie to me. She's just looking out for me. Maybe you're not telling me everything about this Marcus person. That night, we had our first real fight. I showed him Marcus's social media, proved that he was married to a man, explained again that we were just old friends. But doubt had been planted in David's mind, and Patricia's seed was taking root. Update 1. Things didn't improve after that initial confrontation. If anything, they got worse. Patricia had tasted blood in the water, and she wasn't going to let up. The photos incident should have been resolved once David verified everything I said about Marcus. He even spoke to Marcus's husband on the phone, who cheerfully confirmed everything, but the damage was done. David said he believed me, but there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. Patricia started calling even more frequently. She'd ask David leading questions. How's Sarah spending her days? Is she working late often? Have you noticed anything unusual? She was systematically planting seeds of doubt, and I watched helplessly as my husband slowly pulled away from me. I suggested couples therapy. David agreed, though reluctantly. We found a good therapist, Dr. Chen, and started weekly sessions. Dr. Chen quickly identified that the main issue in our marriage wasn't between David and me. It was the lack of boundaries with his mother. She recommended that David have a serious conversation with Patricia about respecting our marriage and privacy. David promised he would, but he never did. He'd come up with excuses. She's getting older, I don't want to upset her, or she means well, she's just protective, or my personal favorite, family is important and I won't choose between you and my mother. The thing was, I wasn't asking him to choose. I was asking him to set normal, healthy boundaries. But to David, any boundary with Patricia felt like a betrayal of her. About 6 months after the Marcus incident, I started a new project at work. It was a big contract with a tech startup, designing their entire brand identity and website. It meant long hours and occasional evening meetings with the client, a young guy named Jake who'd founded the company. I was excited about the project. It was exactly the kind of creative challenge I'd been looking for, and the pay was excellent. David and I had been talking about finally putting a down payment on a house, and this contract would help significantly with our savings. I told David all about it. I showed him the contract, introduced him to Jake at a company happy hour, and kept him updated on every late evening I'd be working. I was completely transparent because I knew Patricia had made him paranoid, and I wanted to prove I had nothing to hide. But Patricia found a way to twist even this. She started asking David why I needed to work such long hours. Why was I so invested in this project? Wasn't it suspicious that the client was a young, single man? She'd say things like, when I was married to your father, I always made sure to be home at a reasonable hour. A wife's priority should be her husband. I found out later that Patricia had actually driven by the office building where I was meeting with Jake one evening. She'd seen his car in the parking lot, a nice Tesla that his startup's investors had helped him lease, and reported back to David that I was spending time with a man who drove an expensive car. The implication was clear. I was after money, having an affair with a wealthy client. The irony was that Jake was engaged to his college sweetheart, and I'd met her several times. She'd even come to a few of our evening work sessions, bringing dinner for us while we worked. But Patricia didn't mention that part to David. David started questioning me more. He'd ask for details about my meetings, sometimes in a casual way, sometimes more aggressively. He'd want to see my phone, my emails, my calendar. I complied because I had nothing to hide, but each request felt like another chip being taken out of our trust, our foundation. Dr. Chen noticed the deterioration in our relationship. In one session, she directly addressed David. You say you trust your wife, but your actions show otherwise. You're allowing your mother to interfere in your marriage to the point where it's destroying your relationship. You need to decide what's more important, your mother's unfounded suspicions or your wife's well-being. David got defensive. He insisted he trusted me, that he was just being cautious. Dr. Chen pressed him. Cautious about what? Sarah has been nothing but transparent with you. She's proven repeatedly that she's trustworthy. The only person who keeps suggesting otherwise is your mother. That session ended early. David said he needed air and walked out. I sat in Dr. Chen's office and cried. She told me something I'll never forget. Sarah, you can't force someone to choose you. All you can do is be yourself, be honest, and let them decide if that's enough. But you also need to decide what you're willing to accept. We stopped going to therapy after that. David said it wasn't helping, that Dr. Chen was biased against his mother. I think the truth was that he didn't like hearing things he didn't want to face. The project with Jake's startup was successfully completed about 3 months later. The company loved my work, paid me a substantial bonus on top of the agreed contract price, and gave me a glowing recommendation. I was proud of what I'd accomplished. David and I celebrated with a nice dinner, and for a moment, things felt normal again. We even looked at a few houses that weekend with our real estate consultant, discussing mortgage options and planning our future. I thought maybe we'd turned a corner. I was wrong. Update 2. 2 months after the successful completion of my project, everything fell apart. It was a regular Thursday evening. David came home from work earlier than usual, around 5:30. I was in the kitchen starting dinner, actually humming to myself because I'd had a good day. I'd landed another promising client, and I was feeling optimistic about our future. David walked into the kitchen and set his briefcase down with a heavy thud. When I looked at him, his face was stone cold, his eyes red like he'd been crying or hadn't slept. My stomach immediately knotted. "We need to talk," he said, and those 4 words made my blood run cold. He pulled out his phone and started showing me screenshots. They were text messages, supposedly from my phone, sent to someone named Alex. The messages were flirtatious, sexual, and absolutely not written by me. There were references to meeting up at hotels, complaints about my boring husband, and explicit content that made me feel sick to read. I don't know what this is, but I didn't send those messages, I said immediately, my hands shaking as I tried to grab his phone to look closer. David, that's not even how I text. Look at the language, the way it's written. That's not me. He pulled his phone away. So someone else is using your number to have an affair? Is that what you're telling me? I don't know how this happened, but I swear to you I did not send those messages. Let me see my phone. I grabbed my purse and pulled out my phone, opening my messages. There was no conversation with anyone named Alex. No sent messages matching what he'd shown me. Show me your phone, David demanded. I handed it to him immediately. He scrolled through everything. My texts, my call history, my emails. There was nothing there because there was nothing to hide. But he wasn't satisfied. You could have deleted them, he said. Then how would you have screenshots of them? I countered. David, think about this logically. If I deleted messages from my phone, where did those screenshots come from? That's when he told me Patricia had them. His mother had somehow obtained these screenshots and sent them to David that afternoon while he was at work. She'd called him, crying, saying she'd been investigating because she was worried about me, and she'd discovered proof of my affair. How did she get screenshots of messages that don't exist on my phone? I demanded. David, please, you have to see that this is fake. Your mother is manufacturing evidence. But he wouldn't listen. He'd already made up his mind. His mother had proof now, and that was enough for him. He told me he wanted me to leave, to stay somewhere else while he figured things out. I refused. This is my home too. I'm not leaving because your mother fabricated text messages. If you believe her over me, over everything we've built together, then you need to leave. We fought for hours that night. I showed him my phone records, offered to go to our mobile carrier the next day to get official logs proving those messages didn't come from my number. But he was so convinced by his mother's evidence that nothing I said mattered. David ended up sleeping in our guest room that night. I lay awake in our bed crying and trying to figure out how Patricia had done this. It hit me around 3 a.m. She could have easily fabricated screenshots. She could have created a fake conversation on her own phone, changed the contact name to my number, and taken screenshots. It would be simple for anyone with basic tech knowledge. The next morning, I called our phone carrier and requested detailed records of every text and call from my number for the past 6 months. They told me it would take a few days to compile. I also reached out to a lawyer, not because I wanted a divorce, but because I needed legal advice on what Patricia was doing. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Mills, told me that what Patricia had done could potentially be considered harassment or defamation, especially if she was knowingly spreading false information. I tried to explain all of this to David. I showed him the confirmation email from our phone carrier that records were being pulled. I told him about the lawyer's opinion, but he was so deep in his mother's manipulation that he saw my defensive actions as proof of guilt. Why do you need a lawyer if you didn't do anything wrong? He asked. Because your mother is trying to destroy our marriage with lies and I need to protect myself. I was shouting by then, frustrated beyond belief. David moved in with Patricia that weekend. He said he needed space to think, and that being around me was too confusing. I was left alone in our apartment, surrounded by all the plans and dreams we'd built together. The real estate consultant's business card was still on our fridge, next to photos of houses we'd been considering. The information packet from our financial advisor about investment properties sat on the coffee table. Everything we'd worked toward was crumbling because of one woman's vendetta against me. The phone records came back a week later. They confirmed exactly what I'd said. There were no text messages to anyone named Alex, no phone calls to unknown numbers, nothing suspicious whatsoever. I sent them to David immediately, along with a letter from our carrier confirming their authenticity. David's response was brief. Mom says these can be faked too. That's when I realized I'd lost him. No amount of evidence would matter because Patricia's word was gospel to him. He'd chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. I moved forward with consulting the lawyer more seriously. Jennifer advised me that if David wanted a divorce, I should protect myself financially and legally. We'd accumulated significant savings during our marriage, including the down payment fund for our house. We had joint accounts, shared assets, and I needed to make sure I wasn't left with nothing. 3 weeks after David moved out, I received divorce papers. The grounds cited were adultery and irretrievable breakdown of marriage. I stared at those papers, at the legal language describing a marriage that had failed, and I felt numb. The man I'd loved, the man I'd planned a future with, was throwing away 7 years together because he believed his mother's fabrications over my proven truth. I hired Jennifer Mills officially to represent me in the divorce. She was excellent, thorough, professional, and honestly angry on my behalf about what Patricia had done. We contested the adultery grounds, providing all the evidence that disproved it. David's lawyer, recommended by Patricia of course, tried to argue that the absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. It was circular logic at its finest. Update 3. The divorce process was brutal. It took almost 8 months from start to finish, and every step felt like Patricia was pulling the strings. David wouldn't meet with me directly. Everything went through lawyers. Jennifer fought hard for me, ensuring I got my fair share of our marital assets, including half of the savings we'd accumulated for our house down payment. Patricia tried to interfere even in the legal proceedings. She submitted a character statement about me, filled with lies and exaggerations, painting me as a neglectful wife who was more interested in my career than my marriage. Jennifer got most of it thrown out as hearsay and irrelevant, but the fact that my former mother-in-law was actively participating in destroying me was crushing. During the discovery phase of the divorce, something interesting came to light. Jennifer subpoenaed phone records for Patricia as well, arguing that since she was making claims about my conduct, her communications were relevant. What we found was staggering. Patricia had been in contact with a private investigator for over 2 years, paying him thousands of dollars to follow me. The Marcus coffee shop photos, professional surveillance, the supposed evidence of my affair with Jake. The investigator had been following me during the entire project. But here's the thing. Despite 2 years of professional surveillance, the investigator had found nothing. No affair, no inappropriate behavior, nothing. Patricia had paid thousands of dollars trying to catch me doing something wrong, and when she couldn't, she'd resorted to fabricating evidence. Jennifer used this information brilliantly. She demonstrated to the court that Patricia had been conducting a targeted harassment campaign against me, that the adultery allegations were baseless, and that David had been manipulated by his mother's obsession with ending our marriage. The judge was not impressed with David's side. The divorce was finalized on a cold Tuesday in January. We were granted a no-fault divorce with no findings of adultery. I received half of our marital assets, which amounted to approximately $75,000 after everything was divided, including my share of the down payment savings and half the value of assets we'd purchased together. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about not being punished financially for a marriage that Patricia had destroyed. David and I spoke only once after the divorce was finalized. It was at the courthouse after we'd both signed the final papers. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, and seemed years older than the last time I'd really looked at him. "I hope you're happy," he said quietly. "Happy? David, I lost my marriage because your mother is a manipulative liar and you chose to believe her over me." "No, I'm not happy." I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to cry in front of him. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead he just turned and walked away. Patricia was waiting for him in the hallway, a satisfied smile on her face. She'd won. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted, her son back under her control, and me out of the picture. The months after the divorce were some of the darkest of my life. I threw myself into work, taking on client after client, working 12 and 14-hour days just to avoid being alone with my thoughts. My friends and family were supportive, but there's only so much they could do. I'd lost not just my husband, but my entire imagined future. The house we'd never buy, the children we'd never have, the life we'd planned together. All of it was gone. I went back to therapy, this time on my own. My therapist, Dr. Reeves, helped me process the grief and betrayal. She pointed out something important. "This wasn't really about you at all. Patricia would have done this to any woman David married. You just happened to be the target of her pathological need to control her son. That helped, in a strange way." Understanding that I couldn't have done anything differently, that no amount of trying to please Patricia would have worked, lifted some of the guilt I'd been carrying. About 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Jake, my former client from the tech startup project. We were both at a coffee shop and he called out to me with a friendly wave. We caught up briefly and he told me his company had grown significantly. They were looking for someone to head their entire creative department, and he asked if I'd be interested. It was an incredible opportunity, a stable salary, benefits, equity in the company, and the chance to build an entire creative team. I interviewed and got the job. For the first time in months, I felt like things were looking up. I was rebuilding, creating a new future for myself. I dated casually, nothing serious. I wasn't ready for another relationship, wasn't sure I'd ever want to be that vulnerable again. My trust had been shattered, not just in romantic partners, but in the institution of marriage itself. How could I ever trust someone to choose me over their family's manipulation? Life moved forward. I bought a small condo with my divorce settlement money, making a smart real estate investment that my financial advisor approved of. It wasn't the house David and I had planned, but it was mine, and that meant something. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, with no one's opinion to consider but my own. I adopted a cat, started painting again, a hobby I'd abandoned during my marriage, and slowly built a life that felt authentic to who I was. Update 4. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was from David's younger sister, Emma. Emma and I had always gotten along well, but after the divorce, she'd maintained distance, presumably out of loyalty to her brother. So when her name flashed on my phone, my first instinct was to ignore it. But curiosity got the better of me. "Sarah, it's Emma. Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you about David." Her voice was urgent, strained. "Emma, I don't think we have anything to discuss about David. That's all in the past. Just 5 minutes, please. It's about my mother." I sighed and agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. When Emma walked into the cafe, she looked nervous, constantly glancing around like she was afraid someone would see us together. Once we sat down, she pulled out her phone. "I need to show you something. But first, I need you to know that I believe you." I always did. But I was scared to go against my mother. I'm so sorry for that. Emma's eyes were filled with tears. She showed me a series of emails. They were between Patricia and the private investigator she'd hired, dated from throughout my marriage to David. The emails were explicit in their intent. Patricia had instructed the investigator to find evidence of wrongdoing, and when he couldn't, she'd asked him to create opportunities that could be photographed in compromising ways. The investigator had refused, saying it was unethical and possibly illegal. That's when Patricia had apparently decided to fabricate the text message evidence herself. Emma had found these emails while helping her mother with computer issues. Patricia wasn't tech-savvy and hadn't properly deleted them. "There's more," Emma said, sliding her phone across the table. "Read this one." It was an email from Patricia to a friend, dated just a month before David filed for divorce. In it, Patricia explicitly stated that she was working on getting rid of that woman, and that she'd found a way to prove I was unfaithful. She described in detail how she'd created fake screenshots using a text messaging app and photos she'd doctored. I felt sick reading it. Here was the proof, in Patricia's own words, that she deliberately destroyed my marriage with manufactured evidence. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked Emma. "Because David is miserable. He's been living with Mom since the divorce, and he's completely under her control. She monitors his phone, his schedule, everything. And..." Emma paused, looking pained. "And he told me last month that he made a terrible mistake. He said he's been reviewing everything that happened, and he doesn't think you cheated. He thinks Mom manipulated him." I felt a strange mix of vindication and anger. A little late for that revelation. I know. That's why I'm here. I think he deserves to see these emails to know definitively what Mom did. But I also think you deserve to decide whether he should see them. You're the one she hurt the most. I took screenshots of everything Emma showed me, thanked her, and went home to think. Part of me wanted to send those emails to David immediately, to rub his face in the proof of his mother's manipulation. But another part of me, the part that Dr. Reeves had helped me develop, knew that doing so wouldn't heal what had been broken. I sat on the information for a week before deciding. I met with Jennifer Mills, my divorce lawyer, and showed her the emails. She advised me that this evidence could potentially be used to reopen the case, possibly even pursue legal action against Patricia for fraud or intentional infliction of emotional distress. But I was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of dealing with Patricia's toxicity. Tired of the whole situation. What I really wanted was closure, and dragging everything back into court wouldn't give me that. Instead, I wrote David a letter. I didn't send him the emails or screenshots. That felt like Emma's choice to make, since she was the one who discovered them. But I wrote about everything I'd been through, how his choice to believe his mother over me had devastated me, and how I'd rebuilt my life from the ruins of our marriage. I told him that I'd heard he was questioning whether he made the right decision, and that while I couldn't tell him what to believe, he needed to understand that trust, once broken, couldn't be easily repaired. I explained that even if he now believed I'd been faithful, the damage was done. He'd shown me that his mother's word would always outweigh mine, and that wasn't a foundation for any relationship. I ended the letter by wishing him well and asking him not to contact me. Whatever realization he'd come to about his mother's manipulation, it was too late for us. I needed to move forward, and that meant leaving him in the past. I never sent the letter. I wrote it, felt the catharsis of getting everything out, and then I burned it in my fireplace. Somehow, the act of writing it and then destroying it felt like the closure I needed. Emma called me a few weeks later to tell me she'd showed David the emails. According to her, he'd confronted Patricia, who'd initially denied everything and then broke down and admitted what she'd done. She'd claimed it was because she knew I wasn't right for him, that a mother's intuition is never wrong, and that she was protecting him from a woman who would have eventually hurt him. David apparently moved out of Patricia's house immediately. He's living on his own now, according to Emma, and he's in therapy trying to understand how he let his mother manipulate him so thoroughly. Emma said he wanted to reach out to me, to apologize and try to make amends, but she'd advised him against it based on what I'd told her. I appreciate that Emma respected my boundaries. The truth is, I don't know what I'd say to David if he contacted me. Part of me still loves the man I married, but I don't know if that man ever really existed, or if he was always going to be someone who chose his mother over his wife. My life now is good. I'm not going to pretend it's perfect. I still have trust issues. I'm still wary of getting seriously involved with anyone, and I sometimes have nightmares about text message screenshots and divorce lawyers. But I have a job I love, a home that's entirely mine, and freedom that I didn't realize I'd been missing during my marriage. I've learned that you can't make someone choose you, and you shouldn't have to. The right person will choose you without prompting, without evidence, without doubt. They'll set boundaries with their family to protect your relationship, and they'll trust you until you give them a concrete reason not to. David wasn't that person for me. Maybe he never could have been, not with Patricia as his mother. And while it took a devastating divorce to realize it, I'm actually grateful now. I'm grateful I found out when I did, rather than after buying a house together or having children. I'm grateful for the strength I discovered in myself during the darkest moments. And I'm grateful for the new life I've built from the ashes of the old one. To anyone reading this who's dealing with a toxic mother-in-law or partner who won't set boundaries with their family, please know that it's not your fault. You can't control someone else's family dynamics, and you can't make someone prioritize their marriage if they're not willing to do so. All you can do is decide what you're willing to accept, and have the courage to walk away when the situation becomes untenable. I wish I'd walked away sooner, before the false accusations and divorce proceedings. But I also understand why I fought so hard to save my marriage. I believed in the vows we'd taken, in the future we'd planned. Sometimes, though, believing isn't enough. Sometimes the other person has to believe too, and has to be willing to fight for the relationship as hard as you are. David never fought for us. He chose to believe the worst about me based on manipulated evidence from someone with a clear bias. That was his choice, and he'll have to live with the consequences. As for me, I'm moving forward. I'm living my life, pursuing my career, and maybe someday, I'll be ready to trust someone again. But it will have to be someone who chooses me, unequivocally and without doubt. Someone who sets boundaries with their family to protect our relationship. Someone who trusts me until I give them a concrete reason not to. Someone who is their own person, not an extension of their mother's will. I don't know if that person exists, but I'm no longer willing to settle for less than I deserve. Patricia may have destroyed my marriage to David, but she inadvertently taught me the most valuable lesson. I am worthy of being chosen, trusted, and protected, and I won't accept anything less ever again. If David has learned the same lesson about standing up to his mother and being his own person, I hope he finds happiness. But that happiness won't be with me. That chapter of my life is closed, and I'm writing a new story now. One where I'm the protagonist, not the victim. And it's going to be a damn good story.